Hi, I'm Matt,
And I'm Misha.
and in this video we're carrying on our topic of guardrails. So recently, Misha and I put together a video introducing guardrails and demonstrating how they can be used. A couple of weeks ago, Misha had a follow-up blog making a comparison between the two major tools, which are Guardrails AI and Nemo. So we're just going to talk about how those tools compare and how you might choose one over another. So, I guess, Misha, maybe just to start with, do you want to remind us of what guardrails are and why we need them?
Yeah, guardrails are tools that are put together with LLMs to ensure that large language models behave in a way that we want them to behave. So we either encourage a certain behavior or restrict it from doing certain things.
And in the blog, you compare the two tools, Guardrails AI and Nemo. What are the principal differences between them?
So both of the tools, open source and under Apache 2 license, they're developed by different teams. Nemo Guardrails is developed by NVIDIA, and Guardrails AI has its own team. The main difference between the two tools, as I see it, is Nemo Guardrails expects programmer wrap the application that they're building so that it sits on top of the whole system, whereas Guardrails AI can be integrated in any part of the application flow.
Right, so you could treat Guardrails AI as a function you call out to as part of your LLM workflow, but with Nemo, it wants to completely own the LLM and the communication with the LLM,
As
right?
essentially, yeah. So that's what Nemo Guardrails does. So it defines the flow.
And so you've got two pieces of example code in the blog. Perhaps we have a look at that now and see how they compare.
As I mentioned, Nemo Guardrails defines the flow of the full LLM powered application. So in here, we have a simple one where a user is expected to greet the system, the board greets back and offers the help. So we have this flow, which would be the whole system flow. How the guardrails work in this case is they compare the user input to a database that is built from the examples provided in the flow file. So in this case, hello and good afternoon, the examples of greetings, and they are vector embedded and put into the database. So at this point, when the system gets something like hello or hi, it will see that it is similar to an example that we already have, and that means that we are in this flow and will proceed executing.
As we said, if you're using Nemo, there's no way to directly interact with the LLM. It's all through Nemo's interface, right?
Yeah, you could directly interact with an LM, but that's not expected according to the library documentation. So the Nemo guardrails would call the LLM.
I wonder if that presents a challenge if you're doing particularly complex prompting. I'm thinking like chain of thought prompting at the same time as the guardrails. Do you think that that's going to be a bit challenging with Nemo?
It would need to be put slightly differently than what people might be used to. But since Nemo Guardrails uses LangChain under the hood, all this stuff is possible to build.
Sure, yeah. So actually, you've still got everything that LangChain would give
Yeah,
you. It's just a different way of building it, I suppose.
yeah. A different way of defining it, or configuring it, I guess.
And what about Guardrails AI? Let's have a look at that now.
Yeah, Guardrails AI does a completely different thing. So here we define the guard configuration that consists of a pydantic model that describes what kind of information we want to extract from the input text or the LLM response for that matter. And we give it a prompt that we want Guardrails AI to use, or prompt template to use for LLM querying for the question. And then this guard is used on, for example, a user input, which could be a question. And in this particular case, we query an LLM and ask it what the topic of this question is, given the prompt template and this description, and if this topic is related to mental health, because we want to restrict users from asking questions on other topics. So we have this guard, we call it with some input text, and what we get back is the response of this type, and then we can decide what we do with it. So there is no decision making that Guardrails AI does itself. I should mention that there are some additional validations that can put in here and retries and all of that, but it's just a simple example.
So I guess the point there is that with Nemo, you can define reasonably complex. Basically, it's a decision tree. Is that
Yeah,
fair to say? Which you can't do
yeah.
here.
You cannot do here, but you can do it with, well, your usual tools. So the Guardrails AI just extracts the information and presents it to you in a machine readable way, so you can make decisions afterwards.
And certainly for me, this feels like a more intuitive way to approach it. And maybe that's just thinking of it as a hardcore programmer.
Yeah, I do feel the same way here. So I do want a little bit more control
Yeah.
in terms of what I do with extracted info. Whereas Nemo guardrails can be useful for someone who just wants to define flows and they have a very complex business logic which has not been built yet. So that might be a
Yeah, I see.
decent
Yeah.
place to put it.
Yeah, that does make sense, yeah, but still, that notion of just ceding control over all of the programmatic flow to the tool, it feels like it could be a challenge once things get complicated.
Yeah, could be.
Okay, so with that discussion in mind, how would you advise someone go about choosing between the two of these? What are the criteria that they should consider?
That's an interesting and complex question. So one natural point of decision is if your application already uses LangChain, then Nemo Guardrails integrates with it pretty well. That's one point that we can talk about. Another one is what kind of LLM you're using. So these tools are compatible with many different LLMs. So Nemo Guardrail supports everything that LangChain supports. Guardrails AI doesn't really care about what exact LLM you're using, but it just needs to respond with valid JSON, which might be tricky for some models. And yeah, another point is how much control you want over the business logic. So with Guardrails AI, you would do your logic in your programming language within the code. With Nemo Guardrails, much of it can be given to the LLM to decide, which might have benefits depending on your specific use case and, I guess, threat model.
So, reflecting on your experiences as a developer trying out these two libraries and bearing in mind this is all very new, what reflections do you have to share?
Yeah, both of these libraries have a long way to go, definitely. So Nemo Guardrails, domain-specific language that is unusual, and this is learning curve, definitely. Sometimes the documentation is not very clear about what's happening under the hood, and there are a lot of things happening under the hood. For Guardrails.ai, the library itself is a little bit less complex, hence slightly easier to use, but it was more difficult to integrate with non-OpenAI LLMs because their default prompt is for GPT. There has been a lot of progress, definitely for both of them over the past few months, and we'll be looking forward to what they come up with next.
Fantastic. And if you want to know the full details, we'll have a link to Misha's blog in the description, along with a link to the previous video where Misha demonstrates the guardrails in action. And until next time, we'll say thanks for listening and no, hang on. And so thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Lovely. I almost hung up there.
Same.
Jesus Christ. Right.
Right.
Stop recording.
That's good, I think.
I have a sneaky question that I've just thought of, but
All right. Go ahead.
if you're not sure, then we'll cut it out.